Joey B, Joe Bonamassa, making waves on the internet, again in the guitar world. It's on Instagram. He's gotten into it on Instagram before, but this time it's just a quote. It's a quote from Guitar Magazine. I'm going to read it to you right now. He says, "The greatest threat to guitar mankind is the notion that stage volumes need to be lower than the volume in which we speak." Yes, he is talking about digital versus real amps, monitoring in the real world versus in-ear monitors. So this is kind of an age-old debate. It's been going on in guitar communities forever, but Joe brings up an interesting point. Is it really a threat to the instrument itself? Let's talk about it. So, it depends on the show. Joe's show, if you've seen it, is much like John Mayer's show in that, before you go crazy, there are loud, real guitar amps that are on stage. It's part of their sound. The electric guitar is them. They're both singers, both great singers. They both write songs, but really they're guitar players. And in Joe's case, you go to see his guitar collection live and in use, and you go to see and hear his amp collection in use. So obviously, if you were to throw Joe on in-ears and he's playing through a Fractal or a Helix or an HX Stomp like I have right here, it's the playing's going to be great, but it's not going to be quite the same experience, particularly not for Joe on stage, because what he's talking about is a quiet or silent stage environment, which has become kind of the norm in a lot of cases. So, for example, if you go see, I was going to say Metallica, but technically that's not a good example because they do have some stage volume, even though they don't have guitar amps on stage anymore. But let's pretend like they don't have the wedge monitors and they're only using in-ears. If you were to stand next to James Hetfield, he's got an Axe Effects under the stage. He's getting all of his guitar, tone, vocal monitoring, everything through his in-ear monitors. And if you were to stand next to him in a gigantic stadium, you would hear the reflections from the PA, you'd hear the crowd, you might hear Lars's drum set acoustically, but you're not going to get the amp hitting you in the back of the legs or in the back. You're not going to get that. And there is something to be said for that. So the comment section of this Instagram post is interesting because it's brought out some pretty heavy hitters, Butch Walker being one of them. If you're not familiar with Butch Walker, do yourself a favor. Go and find him and listen to him. Listen to his band, The Marvelous Three. He's an incredible producer as well as guitar player. But this is what he said. "I'm an in-ear monitor player that also needs to feel the thump of the guitar amp speaker on the back of my leg." So he's kind of doing both. He's wearing in-ear monitors, which give you a lot of control over your monitor mix. But he's also got a electric guitar rig on stage that's pushing air, volume, the whole thing. So it's kind of a hybrid. A lot of people do that. The advantage, though, to doing the silent direct thing is that you get an incredible amount of control on stage, particularly if you have strings you're miking, horns you're miking. If it's a sensitive environment for a vocalist, the show kind of dictates practicality. But what Joe is talking about is, are we letting the practicality and incredible versatility of something like a Helix, HX Stomp, Fractal, Quad Cortex, the list goes on, are we letting that kind of take over the essence of the instrument, the electric guitar? Instruments are loud. Trumpets are loud, for example. Trumpets are loud, and part of the experience is that loud horn. Part of the experience with playing the electric guitar, like it or not, is that loud amplifier. And I'll give you an example. Let me give you an example. I have this HX Stomp hooked up here, okay? So I'm going to unmute it, and we're just going to play a little bit. I'm no Joe Bonamassa, certainly no John Mayer, but I could play well enough to demonstrate this. So I'm going to just play a couple things. Now, if you listen closely, you have what is kind of like the downfall of all of these things is that, I'm going to turn it down for a second. You hear that click? The unplugged sound of an electric guitar, even if it's great, and kind of resonant like the Silver Sky is, should never be audible over top of the tone coming out of whatever you're plugged into. And in this case, this scenario where I'm wearing in-ear monitors, I'm playing through this digital modeler, and I have a microphone here in the room. If you're standing next to me, all you hear is this annoying click of my pick on the strings, and it comes through over top sometimes even the modeled electric guitar tone. The other way that this is odd is if you have something like over my shoulder here, which is the Universal Audio aux box, and it takes that deluxe reverb and you can play it digitally using the amp, but then no speaker, and you can model speakers inside of your computer, but you can also use it as a kind of load box, and what that does is allows you to get that cranked tube tone at a lower volume. This is counterintuitive. It's like quiet yelling. It's weird. It's weird. It sounds good, but it's quiet. So it's kind of confusing to my brain, to my ears sometimes, when you have what is arguably good tone, but it's quiet. It's kind of the equivalent, if you're a guitar player, if you have a distortion pedal and you're playing your clean sound, then you kick on your distortion pedal and it gets softer. That's not how it's supposed to work. A distortion pedal is emulating a loud amplifier that's breaking up. So it does not make sense to have it be a lower volume. So you have to pay attention to those things when you're setting your pedal board up. Even if it's into a real amplifier, you can fall victim to this very same thing. So Joe Bonamassa has set the Instagram on fire again. What do you think, though? What do you think? What kind of a player are you? I'm kind of in both worlds. It just depends. There's certain gigs where you cannot get by with a real amplifier. I just had one where I had to take this HX Stomp with me. It had to be off stage. It was a massive stage for a car company that was doing a vehicle launch. And I was on stage, wireless in-ears. There was no room, no time, no tolerance for stage volume of any sort, and there was nowhere to put an amplifier. So it just didn't make sense. It had to be done with a modeler, and the modeler worked great. It really did. But purists will say, not so much. You should have been using a real amp. You're fake. You're whatever. But again, I think it goes back to the show. Joe Bonamassa plays in big places. John Mayer plays in big places. Butch Walker plays in relatively large places. 1,000-seat club. You can get away with cranking a guitar amp. I am playing guitar on YouTube a lot of times, and it's difficult to crank things up to the level that I would like them to be. So it has to be practical. I can't be blowing out my ears for no reason. So there is that as well. I mean, also you get just an endless amount of sounds out of something like the HX Stomp or Helix or all the other ones I mentioned, where I would never be able to afford that many pedals to get that many tones out of one particular unit. So the debate goes on. Joe did nothing to solve it. He just told you that he thinks it's a threat to the electric guitar. What do you think? Is the electric guitar going to live on through in-ear monitors and digital modeling? Yeah, I think it will. We've had this discussion before, but I'm curious to know what you think.